I asked him what he thought about the Epstein arrest, and he said, Jeffrey Epstein will never make it to trial. There are towels in there.
Welcome to the Daily Beast podcast. I'm Hugh, an executive editor of the Daily Beast. I'm sitting in for Joanna Coles, who is on a well-deserved vacation. She is not on vacation, however, from reading your comments, and she's been texting to say just how well-informed, how engaged, and how many there are. Thank you to everybody who has commented. We are going to have so much for people to comment on today because we are delighted to welcome Tina Brown. Tina is, of course, legendary journalist, a brilliant magazine editor, Vanity Fair and The New Yorker, a best-selling author, and for us at the Daily Beast, the visionary co-founder with Barry Diller of our site. She is now the hottest author on Substack. Her diary, Fresh Hell, which is out just about every week, sometimes more often, is absolute must-read, and that is the reason why she is joining us today. Tina, it's an absolute honour to have you at the Daily Beast.
Oh, it's fun for me to be back.
Welcome back to this building. We live in your vision. You created this site, and that is exactly what I want to get into with you.
And it thrives and roars. Well, it really does.
The thing that I want to talk about is one of the greatest roars of the Daily Beast, which was a groundbreaking piece of journalism that was produced under your watch. But the reason that I mentioned Fresh Hell, your Substack, is because you dropped an incredible set of revelations about Jeffrey Epstein, the man of the moment, the scandal of the century, a story that you continue to cover. And I want to talk about those. I want to talk about what must be the most chilling encounter that I have read about with Jeffrey Epstein, which happened right in this building where we are sitting.
Yeah, it was. It was astounding.
And there's so much to get into. This is an amazing opportunity to talk about Epstein, about Trump, and about MAGA. I will just say to everybody, subscribe to Fresh Hell. It is absolutely unmissable. Obviously, subscribe to the Daily Beast as well. But Tina, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the comments.
Just to set this up, I'm going to go back in time. 1980s and 1990s, you were at the centre of the New York social scene. You were covering it. You were editing first Vanity Fair and The New Yorker. Was Jeffrey Epstein a name on your radar?
You know, he really wasn't much. I mean, I had met Jeffrey Epstein, it is true, because I used to attend the Clinton Global Initiative every year in September. You know, it happened at the time of the UN. And there was always a big opening night reception. I met at Jeffrey Epstein there because actually he was one of the first donors to CGI. So he always was there kind of working the room. And he was like this cold-eyed financier kind of working the crowd. Not anybody that was kind of particularly memorable to me. I do remember him as being a very... he was cold. There's something cold about his eyes, but that's all I knew. I never really sat and chatted with him much.
And were there whispers? Were there...
No whispers. I mean, at that time, Jeffrey Epstein, he was just a financial cafe society guy. Ghislaine Maxwell was a far more sort of prominent social figure. I knew her, not well either, but, you know, being a Brit and, you know, my husband had exposed her father, Robert Maxwell, when he was editor of the Sunday Times. He did this excoriating piece proving her father was a crook. And so I sort of, I didn't therefore eagerly chum up with Ghislaine Maxwell, because I'm sure that certainly know that Harry was a kind of, bête noire to that family. But, she was a lively sort of girl about town woman who you saw at book parties and literary functions and, black tie evenings sometimes. So I did know her a bit. But the interesting thing was she was never with Epstein. So it wasn't as if she came in with Epstein. She never came anywhere with Epstein at that time. So, I mean, I didn't even know she had this deep relationship with him because I never saw him with her.
And the other person on the scene, of course, or who's now on the scene, Donald Trump.
Indeed. And I certainly did know him. Yes, indeed. I was, I sat next to him at a dinner that, a lunch that Ivana gave with Ann Getty at the time. And, Trump was sitting, there was somebody quite boring next to me and somebody quite boring next to him. So he and I were sort of talking to each other over our lunch partners. And, he was I thought, hilarious, bravado, sort of swashbuckling New York character. He said, Ivana made me go to the opera last night, 4 hours, like Pavarotti, who cares? It was like that. And I thought he was quite amusing. And we covered him, subsequently a lot, until he started to unravel his business and his divorce. And then he did not like what we said about him. But yeah, I knew him too.
So I'm going to fast forward to 2010, because that was the year that you commissioned Conchita Sarnoff to investigate Jeffrey Epstein. And we are going to put links to those stories in the show notes because they can still be read. They are absolutely extraordinary pieces of journalism. They are full of details and names that continue to resonate to this day. But can you just unpack the backstory?
Yeah,
what brought this to you?
Well, it's very interesting because I didn't know Conchita Sarnoff before. This was I'd been at the Beast at that point, a couple of years. I didn't know Conchita Sarnoff at that point, but I was called by somebody we both knew who said that because I used to do the Women in the World summits, which were about empowering women who, many of whom had been sort of sexually trafficked or, no education, etc., he thought that I would respond well to a story that he knew someone who'd written, who is was a trafficking activist, a sex trafficking activist, Conchita Sarnoff, and she'd stumbled on this story, and he thought that I should see it because he thought it was a big story and others wouldn't have the courage to publish it, and he thought that we would because we'd shown a commitment to women who had been, abused. That's really why I think she made her way to me. And she came to see me and told me this extraordinary story about how she had been, in the course of her sex trafficking investigations, nothing to do with journalism, her activism, she had been interviewing a Mexican child sex trafficker in the Palm Beach stockade. And during the course of the interview, he told her that a great many of these very underage girls were trafficked to rich American men in Palm Beach. And she was really taken aback because she had thought that the whole kind of route of these girls was like, cartel members, etc. She didn't expect to hear that wealthy, A-list kind of Palm Beach people were having girls delivered to them. So she decided, and then she remembered a small item saying that Jeffrey Epstein had been arrested. And she actually did know Jeffrey Epstein, who'd asked her out for a date in New York. So the name resonated. So she decided to go to the Palm Beach police and ask if she could look at the files. And when she looked at the files on the case, she was completely, her hair was on fire because it turned out Epstein had received a 13-month sentence for soliciting prostitution with two minors. But actually, in the files, it showed that there were multiple girls. I think it was 24 girls who had lodged complaints about his activities. And she couldn't understand how this had got, bargained down to such a tiny sentence of 13 months of where he was able to, it was a work release program. It wasn't even actually behind bars. That's when she thought, we've got a story here. And she found that he'd made this sweetheart deal with the Attorney General there. And then the question was why. And so what the story really became was how this man, because of his contacts, his political donors, who he gave a huge amount of money, of course, to politicians, his contacts, his wealth, his pressure, with his lawyers, his willingness to humiliate and sort of, totally denigrate the young girls who'd accused him, had actually got him to a place where he could just get out with a slap on the wrist. So that was our story, really. And it was an outrageous story, in my view. I think I was totally shocked to think that someone who was obviously such a predatory pedophile could have such a small sentence, and he was back in society. That's when I began to take notice of him again. And, he wasn't totally prominent. It's not like he was in the papers every day, but Jeffrey Epstein was back on the scene. You could see that. So that's what, of course, made it very interesting to me. And so we published, I think it was a six-part series by Conchita that was fantastic journalism.
I thought I should highlight the original headline, Jeffrey Epstein, billionaire paedophile goes free. And in this piece, Conchita, who I had the privilege to speak to yesterday, and who remains engaged in this story, she highlighted some of the names that still resonate to this day. Prince Andrew, the connections to Bill Clinton, Ehud Barak, who was the former Israeli Prime Minister, Bill Richardson, who was a former New Mexico governor, who now the late Bill Richardson, and Larry Summers, who at the time was described as a former Treasury Secretary, went on to run Harvard, still a prominent economist. When you saw those names, what was your feeling?
Well, I was just stunned. I just thought, it's a web here that we have here. It's something much bigger than I had realized. So we published the first piece. And that's when I first got a phone call. First of all, I got a call from Epstein's lawyer and making sort of noises about suing. And we ignored that. Then I got a call from Epstein himself. Now he's my best friend, having met him, twice or something at the
and I take
CGI.
You had never really spoken to him. You had
no. He knew who I was. I knew who he was. But yeah, no. So he wasn't a friend, and he kind of was very sort of on the phone. It was like, I just want to say, you should be aware that Conchita Sarnoff is a well-known nutcase. I mean, she's been spreading this nonsense about me. It's totally ridiculous. You should kill this story. So I thanked him. I said, well, thank you very much. If you've got a problem, talk to the Daily Beast lawyer. End of story. And then a couple of days later, I went out to lunch, and I came back from lunch into this very glass building that we were sitting, into my, glass office. And sitting in my own office in a chair in front of my desk was, guess who? Jeffrey Epstein. And I was stunned. I mean, I stood at the door just kind of aghast, because my question is how did he get past the security? Because we have a security desk downstairs who apprehended me today and took my picture, and they were there in force then. Very hard to get past those guys. I don't think people ever do. So how he got through, I don't know. I mean, he is a masterclass, or was a masterclass con man. So maybe he was just able always to kind of get what he wanted. But he came up and he'd come into my office, and he'd obviously said to my assistant, where is Tina Brown's office? And then he went and sat in my room. So I stood by the door and I said to him, Jeffrey, what are you doing here? He said, just stop. And he looked at me with this kind of snake eyes, cold, and it was menacing. It was a really menacing. And he pointed his finger and he said, just stop. And I said, Jeffrey, we are continuing to do these pieces. If you have an issue, talk to us. Just stop. He said, there will be consequences if you don't stop. And then he just got up and he left my room. And it was a very chilling experience. I mean, it was scary, actually, but we barreled ahead. Obviously, it meant we were extremely careful with the legal readings, which were very careful. And I fully expected a sort of, a 12 barrel kind of legal assault after this. But he went very quiet. And I think that he decided that at that time, this was the early days of the Beast, it was also a time when there was a less of a sense of a story going viral, And I think that he decided, what, I'm going to wait it out, see how bad it gets. If I start to fan the flames, it might get worse. Let's see whether we can just kind of ride it out. And he swiftly followed up with a whole kind of philanthropic charm offensive where he was constantly being quoted as having given money to various foundations, etc. And I think that one of the points then was that, Jeffrey Epstein wasn't terribly well known at all. I mean, he wasn't really known to anyone except, the kind of social in crowd, as it were. Secondly, it was pre-Me Too. And in those days, those kind of stories didn't quite get the same traction that they might do. They certainly did do later. And of course, the story was then taken up by Julie Brown in Miami Herald. And she actually built on Conchita's story, but that was post-Me Too. So, it had a far bigger impact then. But, it was a very unsettling experience, and you could see what a menace he could be, and how, of course, he would overpower some young, 15-year-old girl, very easily. He was so intimidating. So, it was I look back on it, of course, with, in a very different way than how I saw it at the time. Interestingly, about 6 months after this, I got a phone call from the publicist, Peggy Siegel. And she said to me, Tina, I want you to come to a great dinner that we're having tonight. Prince Andrew's in town, and I thought you might want to come to this dinner because I know you know Prince Andrew. She said it's at Jeffrey Epstein's house. And the other guests, wait for it, Woody Allen and Charlie Rose. So I I was standing out there, and I don't know whether I don't think Michael heard it, but we had a writer called Lloyd Grove who at the time was working for us, and he was in the next desk.
A legendary daily, legendary media journalist.
He's never forgotten it because I just kind of exploded into the phone. What the fuck is this? The pedophile's ball? I said, how dare you ask me to this day? Because she obviously hadn't read our pieces. I don't know she said, I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, no, that's all old stuff. That's just nothing to do. She obviously, he was still perpetrating the myth that he was an invitable human at that point, and people were still buying into it. I am happy to say I declined. And now, of course, that dinner has become almost like a sort of, were you one of the people who went to that because it was like such a, part of me wishes to God I had been there. Because, what a scene, frankly.
I believe was the dinner that was also attended by George Stephanopoulos and Katie Couric.
Indeed.
And both of them have expressed grave regret for that.
Indeed.
And, said that they had clearly no idea of the intention. I believe George Stephanopoulos has said that he was fascinated by the idea of meeting Prince Andrew and had no previous or experience of Epstein and no subsequent dealings.
That irritated me even more because it also meant they hadn't read our 6-part series in the Daily Beast, of which I was enormously proud. But you see, that is how Epstein worked, though. The hook was Prince Andrew.
Yes.
The fact is that George Stephanopoulos would not have gone to dinner at Epstein's house, but he always used these people. And in many ways, it's interesting. His whole game, was to kind of use other names to catch only the big whales that he was interested in. Because as we know, he really didn't have any clients. He only had about 3 clients, essentially. It didn't matter. The whole kind of charade of knowing people and being able to get anyone to come to his house was really all about creating the social theatre that would excite, he thought, and build credibility with the big whales that would then invest.
So did you have any subsequent encounters with him?
Not after that.
Never another unwise invitation from...
No. There was no more... Well, no, indeed. Peggy backtracked completely and said she had no idea and then called me back and said, you're not... Because I was actually about to sit down and write the story up. And then I'm afraid I wimped out because she then called me and said, you won't write this, will you? You won't write this. So, yeah, no, she... And then, of course, Peggy suffered a lot from the fact that she did continue to see Jeffrey and invited him to her screenings and so forth.
And I believe that Peggy Segal has said that she was never paid by Epstein or represented him directly, but that she helped him socially. And
who knows?
Kind of speaks to that appeal that you're talking about.
I think that to be in his web was to be, at dinners with the likes of the people I just mentioned. So there were some people who dug that,
One of I was just talking, you mentioned Michael, and that's Michael Daly, who is our senior correspondent. He's a legendary figure in the Daily Beast, an amazingly distinguished journalist. And I was just talking to him. We were discussing the impact that Jeffrey Epstein has had on this web and the names of people that he has either brought down from public life. Prince Andrew, he had a possibly terminal effect on Bill Gates' marriage. He's led to the disgrace of Jess Staley, who was a very senior and significant banker. And there have been suicides too. There is a kind of terrible darkness around Jeffrey Epstein. there have been at least 4 suicides in the wake of Epstein. The 2 of the young girls died, in their 30s. More recently, there was, of course, the suicide, which made quite a lot of news, of Virginia Giuffre, who was the girl who was trafficked by Epstein to Prince Andrew. And she committed suicide in Australia, age 41, having said she never would. So once again, it's like, did she commit suicide? Yeah. There's always this strange question mark around all these people around Epstein. And of course, there was another suicide of his major partner in crime, who was, Jean-Luc Brunel, who was the French model agency owner, who really essentially was a kind of partner for Epstein in finding girls and sending them to Epstein. He was another real kind of underage shark. And he killed himself in a prison in Paris. Same way. He knotted bed sheets in his case. Well, one of the other really chilling and prescient revelations on your Substack was what an FBI agent told Conchita in 2019.
Absolutely.
And just to set the scene, 2019 in July, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey when he returned from Paris, where he had been spending time. And it was, I'm a working journalist, but at the time we were absolutely astonished to learn that this had happened. We had, like many people, every outlet had covered Jeffrey Epstein extensively for the last few years. And this revelation came out entirely out of the blue. But Conchita told you something absolutely chilling.
Well, Conchita and I sort of stayed in touch, and she remained like a dog with a bone, like every sort of great investigator. She just remained outraged. Her outrage never went away. Anyway, so she texted me and she said, I must tell you something incredible. And I said, what's that? She said, I just was talking to one of my major FBI sources, and she is sourced up the wazoo in the FBI. She really is. She has incredible high echelon relationships in the Justice Department. And she said, he just said to me, I asked him what he thought about the Epstein arrest. And he said, Jeffrey Epstein will never make it to trial. There are towels in there. It's a chilling thing. I mean, I personally am of the persuasion that it was not suicide. I have always found it very hard to believe that it was, because he was actually, this was not long after his arrest. There was still some legal hope that he could be got out on bail. In fact, he'd had a pretty positive meeting before he killed himself with his own lawyer, telling him that he thought the chances of getting getting out on bail were actually better. So it was too early in the moment for him to really, I think, commit suicide. Not to mention all the multiple, so-called coincidences of the two guards, who were asleep apparently outside the cell, and so they didn't notice anything. One of them was supposedly online shopping. There was the cellmate who was supposed to be there, who everybody who's a suicide risk in Rikers always has, or MCC as it was, always has, a co-cellmate. That person had been moved, and so he was on his own, even though it was quite against, prison protocol, in fact. And then, of course, the missing minutes in the surveillance footage, which gets more and more murky as we go on.
Just before we started this recording, those missing minutes apparently grew. Some excellent reporting by Wired magazine had found initially that the metadata suggested that what we were told was the full video was not in fact the full raw video, and that there was at least a minute missing. There are now at least 3.5 missing minutes.
Indeed, and it was spliced together from other. It wasn't a single discrete piece of video. It was spatched together. And no, I mean it's 3 minutes is long enough. I mean, how long did it take the Navy SEALs to get into Bin Laden's house and kill everybody there? I mean, it's a mysterious question, and I don't think has been fully properly investigated. I mean, I never understood why Bill Barr, like the day after, or certainly very close to the day after, flew immediately down there and spent a long time in the prison. I mean, why? There's too many unanswered questions. And of course, now the biggest question is why, having hyped this whole question of Epstein all these years, I mean, Don Trump Jr. tweeted, I think in 2003, time to release the files, so they were all on it. I will say for Trump that when he was asked by Fox if he would pardon him, the full tape, if you look at it, not as opposed to the soundbite, is more equivocal than what we've been told. Because we only ever see the thing where he says, yes, I would release the files. He then followed it up with quite a lot of demurring of if it seems as if there is credible, so it was a little more, much less, emphatic than when he was asked about the JFK files.
I thought you offered a brilliant description of this scandal and mystery, that it's like JFK and Marilyn Monroe. It seems that every time we pull back another layer, we just find more mystery.
Yes.
And one of the most remarkable things is we're sitting discussing this in 2025. The events that we're talking about began at the very latest in the 1990s. Jeffrey Epstein was abusing children. He was first investigated by the police in 2004.
Yeah.
He signed a non-prosecution agreement in 2007.
Yeah.
He was convicted by plea agreement for only one count in 2008. And this should all be ancient history. But instead, we have a live unfolding scandal in front of our eyes that appears to, certainly engulfs the president and may threaten his connection to his base.
It is. I mean, and, I think one thing, before when you talked about the names, right? One of the things that makes the Epstein story sort of so complex is that his swirl and network of connections were often involved with him for sort of different reasons in a strange way. I mean, there were the people, because, he was a crook, Jeffrey Epstein. He was either laundering money for people or hiding money for people. He was very, very good at hiding people's money, and he knew how to do that. And there are a lot of people, I think, whose money he hid. And of course, once he'd done that, they were in his thrall. So there were the people that were, were going to him because they knew he could hide money. There were the people who were, he was laundering money. There were the people who, were sort of interested in his whole social stuff, in a kind of slightly cafe society, where's the action kind of way. And then there were the outright, hardcore pedophile, people who realized that Jeffrey Epstein could provide them with underage girls, which he did. So there's a lot of different layers of the people around Epstein. So that when there are some who say, look, I had nothing to do with this stuff, it's true, because he had a big network. I mean, when I mentioned, that dinner party, they weren't all there for underage girls. I mean, George Stephanopoulos certainly wasn't, there were people who used to fraternize with Epstein who had nothing to do with those things. So it makes it sort of doubly hard to penetrate. And of course, for the untutored in kind of what social names mean, for the MAGA base, it's like all these names are fancy people who were pedophiles.
So that is the perfect moment to ask Donald Trump, a man who absolutely was somewhere in Jeffrey Epstein's web. Where do you place him in that web?
Well, it was 15 years, wasn't it, that he was hanging out with Epstein? I think if you look at the video that, that very good piece of video from, I think it was CNBC, which shows them at a party together talking. And actually, I think it's worth getting a lip reader to just see if you can find out exactly what they were saying to each other. But to me, the conversation was straight grab her by the pussy. It was a grab her by the pussy conversation. It was they're talking together, heads together, and that Trump is saying, he's talking, and you can see that they're looking at women on the dance floor and saying, well, she's hot, and, wouldn't you like to do X with her? And so there was clearly a bond of, louche, girl hunting kind of behavior. So, yeah, I think he was very much involved with that sort of source scene with Epstein. I don't happen to think that little girls are the president's thing. I really don't. I think that he's a guy who likes, we know what he likes. He likes, very sort of Playboy bunny types and models, and he's never shown a predilection for that. So I think that's why it's complex. I think that he was hanging out with Epstein because there was a lot of stuff going on, girls, rich people. I mean, all this thick texture of stuff that Trump is loves. Frankly, he loves that kind of scene, and it doesn't do him any good. The fact that he used to hang out with him as president. Before he was president. I mean, he obviously doesn't want to talk about that. It's strange to me, actually, though, that he's become so agitated about these files. Now, I mean, why is he so agitated? Is it simply that they lied for so long about what was there, or his circle did, that he doesn't want to be revealed as there's really nothing here, genuinely? Or, are there people in those files? I mean, is he in the files a lot and it just simply doesn't want to be there? Are there people with whom he's entangled now who he feels he owes something to? I mean, I did actually think of another possibility, which was is it more useful for Trump to know the names and other people don't? I mean, Trump is the king of leverage, right?
Compromat. It's great compromat, frankly. So that could be one thing, that is there to be explored. I do think, though, that he has not understood how this is such a kind of core article of faith for MAGA. For some reason that it's worth a psychologist telling us is they're obsessed with pedophilia, his base. I mean, it's the whole QAnon thing was all pedophilia. There was the whole thing about how Hillary Clinton was supposed to be running a pedophile ring in a pizza store. I mean, what it is about pedophilia and these people, I don't know, but they are obsessed. And I don't think it is going to get dropped. And I think that what is interesting is that the explosive tweet that he sent out on Tuesday about this is I'm sick of this, basically, it's and I don't care what my supporters think about, if they don't want to be my supporters, I don't care. I thought it was a very ill-advised tweet on his part, because essentially it was he's forgetting who owns him.
right? And he's mad as hell now because they're supposed to be owned by him. I mean, as we know, famously, he said, I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and my base would still love me. He finds this insurrection deeply aggravating because they're supposed to just get in line and worship him. And they're not, and they on their part have begun to suspect, I mean, as Candace Owens said, I mean, with a sort of...
We are finding ourselves agreeing with...
Yeah, Candace Owens.
Candace
Owens suddenly says in her thing about, it's almost as if Trump thinks his base is stupid. And I'm thinking, you think? I mean, he's always thought they were stupid. That's the whole point. That's been his superpower. He has known this, he knows in his heart. You think he wants to hang out with a lot of those people? No, he doesn't,
So just in the last... I think I've collated 48 hours. That explosive tweet, he's then followed that up. He talked about how people had bought into bullshit, that they are bad people, that they are weaklings, that they are stupid people.
Right.
And he sought to blame the Democrats, who very clearly are nowhere near.
Which even MAGA are like,
yes.
They're not buying that.
Yes.
Because to be quite honest, I mean, half the people on those planes were Democrats. I mean, I don't think any Democratic president wanted to release, get any more names like Governor Bill Richardson and the whole thing that Clinton was constantly being tarred with and all the rest of it. None of them wanted to go there at all. So this is a nonsense. And it's like suddenly it must have sort of hit him in the shower or something. I can blame this on Democrats. He's too late. I mean, this has not been for him a dexterous sort of, use of lying, which is usually very effective in his side. But it's not working this time.
What do you think? You've observed so many scandals, sagas over the years and reported on them so rigorously. What is it about this that sets it apart? And what is it that makes it so difficult for Trump to shake?
Well, I mean, I think it's the names, obviously. It completely dovetails with the theory of his base that there is this elite global power class who have never understood, who've always sneered and had contempt for them. And Trump is supposed to be the person who understands them and their value. He was the one who saw them, as it were. And indeed, if you, Alexandra Pelosi's wonderful documentary about the January the 6th has got some great interviews with people who the January 6th who came out of prison, long before they were pardoned. Who she asked, like, how do you feel about Trump? Now, we love him. I mean, the fact we don't care. He's our guy. He knows who we are. He speaks directly to us. They kept saying, he speaks to us. So suddenly it's like Trump's not speaking to them anymore. He's behaving as if they're fools. In fact, he said so. He said, you're weaklings. So he's really misjudged this because he's basically telling them, he's treating them like the global elite that they hate so much have always treated them. This is not good. This is not this is not their guy. This is not the president they thought he was going to be. And it's almost as if Trump has forgotten who owns him, essentially, and is turning into a president who does things that they hate. Like, he's supposed to be he's done great for them on immigration. They love what he's done on that. But, I mean, he's supposed to hate foreign wars. And what's he doing? Sending, arms to Ukraine now and dropping bombs on Iran. And, this is not what he's supposed to be doing. So they're beginning to think, what's happened to our guy? Is he our guy? And if they start to think he isn't, that's a very dangerous moment, I think, for Trump, because it could be a huge sort of pivot in his power. Because this has always been his power, that they believe that they have this intimate bond of sensibility and value to him. And if they think he's just, kicking them to the curb and calling them weaklings and just get on the train because I'm telling you, I don't think that's going to play well.
Do you sense this man you sat beside that was gregarious and hilarious, do you sense he has the survival skills that he can come through this? Or is this as you put it, a moment that MAGA splits asunder?
Well, I think ironically, and who would have thought it, because how many times in the last decade have we all said, we'll never get away with this? I mean, all the way...
This is the moment. This is it.
This is the moment. I mean, from the moment he said, John McCain was like a loser, it's like every time you thought, well, that's the end of his career. Never was.
And to his supporters, that's Trump derangement syndrome.
Absolutely.
They tar people as...
So it's never... He survived... I mean, look at all the lawsuits he survived. I mean, he was supposed to be crushed by all of these, lawsuits during the last 4 or 5 years. He won every one of them, or he got away with one of them. And the ones he didn't win, it hasn't mattered. So he has been this Teflon creature, and he's shot and he isn't. I mean, it's like he's been absolutely untouchable. And who would have thought that it's this, tawdry old scandal that might be the tipping point? I don't think any one of us would have said, if you were asked any of us, what is the thing that will finally be, a bridge too far for the MAGA base to turn on him? Well, none of us would have said the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
If you were to go back to 2010, that moment that you commissioned, I'll just repeat my point. There was a scandal foretold. Almost all the details of what we know about Epstein are in this extraordinary series. What would have made it more resonant? What would have made people understand it? Or is it something that...
I think it was the moment. It was too early. Sometimes when you're first, you're too early. People were not interested enough in him at that point. I mean, there are plenty of stories about, sleazy socialites or whatever that you read, but, you don't know them, I think perhaps obviously if if it had happened when I was the editor of Vanity Fair, I could have probably made a bigger noise with it. Don't forget the Daily Beast was a young, yes. A sort of, renegade site that had not, been on the scene that long. So, had it been published in the New York Times, perhaps it would have had. But I sort of somehow think it wouldn't, because people weren't that interested in Jeffrey Epstein. I think what people were really interested in, and the sort of story moved to that, which was like, what was Bill Clinton doing on that plane? So then that became that story.
What do you one of the things that you wrote about on your latest Fresh Hell on Tuesday night is about Dan Bongino.
Yes.
Who is an extraordinary avatar for what is happening inside MAGA. He's a deputy director of the FBI, a position that in normal times would be held by somebody with extraordinary law enforcement experience. He is admittedly a former police officer and Secret Service agent, but he's really known for being a podcaster.
Yes.
And for expressing robust right-wing views would be one way to put it, and somebody who had absolutely fueled the Epstein fire. But he is now, and I just want to highlight the way you express it, a tattooed snowflake. He was absent without leave from FBI headquarters for days.
Yeah, absolutely pathetic, wasn't it? I mean, I think that he hates the job. I mean, he really has made no secret of that, because it's so much easier and, P.S., much more lucrative to be sitting in your basement bloviating and grabbing rumors out of the air and putting them out there and getting adulation for it and, big bucks, than it is to be sitting, as he put it, in a white office for 7:30 in the morning, like, hello, that's what most people do.
Yes.
And sort of working. I mean, he said, "Oh, I don't deal in rumors anymore. I deal in we have to deal in evidence." Yeah, you. Guess what happens when you deal in evidence? I mean, this rumor mongering goes out the window. So he's in a very difficult position, because all of his life has been about undermining the FBI, and it's been about propaganding absolute rubbish on the airways, and now he's in the most kind of forensically fact driven organization in the country, essentially, which has to be about backing up what you say. So he's in a very difficult situation, and I think it's quite obvious he'd so much rather be back in his basement bloviating and getting big checks.
Is he? Obviously, we don't know if he's going to stay or go, and I should say we are taping this a few enough hours before it's going to go out on air that anything could happen.
I think he's toast already. I mean, if one thing one learns about Trump is you have to listen very carefully to his endorsements, like his fulsome endorsements. And remember his fulsome endorsements of Michael Waltz, who was part of Signalgate. And the next thing is, wait a bit, and then suddenly, bam, he's out of there. I think Dan is toast, because, Trump says, he was asked, like, well, is he still in post? Is he still? And he goes like, yeah, I think he's doing well. I think that, I think he, I loved his show. I used to go on his show a lot. That's not an endorsement at all. It has a kind of sinister vagueness to it. And I think he's already decided that he's going to go. And I don't think that Dan Bongino will care much. I think that he will go back to his basement.
Who else are you looking at next as avatars for this scandal? Because we've had this parade of extraordinary names.
Well, I think the banking piece of it still hasn't really been looked at as closely as it might. I mean, obviously, Jess Staley is the guy who knows more than anyone, essentially. He was the banker at JP Morgan, who then moved to had to be head of Barclays Bank, but he managed, he was the kind of the guy who managed the Epstein account, and he also, his emails are very incriminating. I mean, he clearly had more than a money managing relationship with Epstein and his will. So there's a lot, I think, that he hasn't come up with, and I think he's not a dead story in that there might come a point when he starts to sort of talk to get some change in his predicament, whatever it might be. So I think the banking part of it is very, very interesting. I mean, I think we have to have a sort of really sort of an autopsy on the way that Epstein died again. I mean, and what is the reason for these tapes being spliced together? I mean, somebody knows who did that. And so let's go back in terms of reporting and find out who's the guy who spliced the tapes and who was he reporting to and what was he asked to do? Because that's a very mysterious circumstance.
I think one of the things that you were absolutely right to put at the very heart of that reporting back in 2010, and I hope that we continue to do at The Beast, is the victims.
Yeah.
There are, according to the Department of Justice's allegedly final memo, as many as 1,000 young girls were victimised.
Yes.
And of those, we know, as you were just highlighting, that at least 3 of them are dead.
Yeah.
By suicide or drug overdoses. It's a total of tragedy.
It's a total tragedy. I mean, this is one of the things that absolutely appalled Conchita when she went through those first police files, that 2 of the girls, were 14 years old who were shipped in from the Balkans. I mean, this is really heinous. And I think that the Giuffre story Virginia Giuffre does remain a very interesting story because she was at the heart of this case. She's the one who brought down Prince Andrew. She was there for years with them. She's the one who really sort of helped to finger Ghislaine as an accomplice. So her story, she suddenly commits suicide in Australia. I mean, I know she'd been having a rough time. Marriage had gone very bad, and her husband, she alleged, was abusive towards her. But there's too many questions again about that and what Virginia knew. I noticed that the day after her death, you saw 2 people carrying boxes out of her apartment. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder what 2 specific boxes. And you think, who made the decision to go in there right away and take these 2 boxes out? There's more there than we know. And I think that story has got more legs in it.
And for Donald Trump, what's your prediction?
He's going to have to come up with a better version than he is at the moment. I mean, he has got to be made to understand this is not something he can blow off. So what does he do? I mean, is he going to... We don't know what's in those files. If there's nothing in the files, as he says, then why not release them?
Yes.
There is something in those files he does not want to see out there. And how he gets around that, I don't know. I think it's a really knotty issue for him. And I don't think it's going to go away. I think he will try to do things that will distract everybody. I mean, I think he can drop a bomb on Moscow, or he'll do anything he can to try to change the subject. But I don't think this particular story can be expunged like he usually does.
Wow. Tina, thank you for coming and talking to us. Thank you for being part of it, for setting up the Daily Beast. I'm just going to say again, the 6-part series is an extraordinary work of journalism, and it stands not just the test of time, it shows the direction of travel. Tina, thank you for commissioning it.
What fun to be back here.
Thank you for an extraordinary set of insights also into Donald Trump. a man who I do not think is going to be inviting you to dinner in the near future either.
I'm afraid I burn a lot of bridges in fresh hell. But I will say that the beast is alive, and I'm so thrilled at the current regime. I think it's finally got its kind of gusto back. I mean, it's always been a wonderful sight, actually, even in periods which has been less good than others. But right now it's on fire. So congratulations to you too.
Kind, and thank you so much for giving us the vision and the DNA.
Thank you.
And we so much appreciate it and cannot wait to welcome you back when I think my much more distinguished co-host, Joanna Coles, will be asking the questions.
Well, Joanna and I go way back, so that'll be fun.
Thank you, Tina.
Bye.
Wow. What an extraordinary interview. Thank you to Tina Brown for bringing incredible insights, jaw-dropping revelations, and some of the most incredible details about what is undoubtedly the scandal of the century. To keep up with the latest developments on Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump and that scandal, subscribe to The Daily Beast. It could not be easier. We will keep you appraised. Just go to www.thedailybeast.com and you will be instantly up to date with what's happening. The other subscription that you must make is Tina Brown's Fresh Hell on Substack. It is the hottest thing on Substack right now, and I cannot wait to devour its next edition. And finally, thank you to Joanna for letting me sit in her seat. As she would say, be beast. The Daily Beast podcast is produced by Devin Rogerino and Anna Von Usen and edited by Jesse Millward.